Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode 209 of the Thoughtium Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. I'm Anthony Ewing, your host, CEO, co-founder here at Thoughtium, and we come to you live every Thursday afternoon, bringing you leaders and leadership topics that matter most. We've been at this week over week for really the last 4 years, and the conversation in so many ways has evolved, but in so many ways it hasn't. We talk evergreen topics, and today we have a topic that I know all of us leaders particularly are focused on, especially those who are in emerging commercial organizations. And we have a guest today that has really seen a lot of the commercial landscape within a few different businesses over the course of the last decade. We are so excited and so proud to have President of Omada Health, Wei-Li Shao. We're going to be focusing on what we're calling the art and science of leading today's commercial teams. And we're just thrilled again, Wei-Li, to have you at the table. So we're going to bring you forward and begin the discussion. Wei-Li, how are you?
I'm doing great, Anthony. 209 episodes, man. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's just one of those, the many things that you just kind of have to put the work in week over week to build a business. You know this probably better than most. We're proud most of the consistency with Navigating Now. And we were just talking how you've been on the show, but it was a couple years ago, and we were kind of in the throes of the pandemic. And so one of the exciting things we've been able to do is bring guests back on here now 2-3 years later to talk about the evolution of your leadership, and in this case, the evolution of the commercial organization. So Wei-Li, currently you're the president at Omada. You've also played the CCO role, and I've worked for and with and alongside a handful of incredibly powerful and effective commercial leaders, you being one of them. And I always say this, and I said this in the introduction to the episode on LinkedIn, that the most effective commercial C-suite leaders can stand on the stage and guide and ground the team in the future vision for the organization just as effectively as they can walk the hallways and inspire individuals one by one, or know more about a topic than somebody in a meeting room on Wednesday. That's kind of the role that you've played as a commercial leader. So Wei-Li, by way of introduction, my first question for you is, how has your leadership style maybe changed over the course of the last 4 years, 3-4 years? What's new about your style today than it was 3 or 4 years ago?
It's a great question, Anthony. I always find these kinds of questions hard to answer. And I always say, the best way to really know is you kind of ask the teams that I lead and the people that work with me. So maybe that's a different episode. But as I think about it, certainly what I focused on and how I lead has, kind of ebbed and flowed with our business cycles, what's happening with our business. But, when I think about it, my journey here at Omada Health, so I came from a really large organization that had 35,000 employees, today more than $40 billion in global sales, and then came over to Omada that had, maybe a little over 300 employees at the particular time, and was just raising their Series C round of funding. And so that kind of gives you an idea of kind of where we were in the two kind of like dichotomous worlds that I was coming from and going to. And at that particular time, it was super exciting in the sense that we still had our startup roots. We were trying to get into significant scale. And so my focus really was one part, thinking about growth, but like still in the weeds. When you're in a company that has a little over 300 companies, there's no issue. There's no topic that is too small or too big for you as a senior leader. And so you are bouncing from topics that are really about like, hey, what is it we're going to do in this pitch tomorrow with a customer? Let's look at the slides. What's the high ground opener? Do we know enough about Patty or John who's showing up to the call? And to some extent, maybe hopefully not surprising to folks, is that fast forward 5 years from now, we're still having those conversations, but for whale and mega clients. And so the stakes are higher. And so one of the things that hasn't changed is really frontline involvement in the biggest deals. And I think that
Mhm.
should never change. I don't care if you're a $40 billion organization or a $4 million organization, having your hands on the most important accounts and interactions externally that you should be having as an organization, that should never change. What has changed is back then it was really about like, okay, what are the functions within our business that are probably doing a lot of different things, and how do you become great within that function?
Mm.
And we were less obsessed with, okay, what is it that this function needs to do and how it integrates with the next function across the value chain of our business. So the way to break it down is like, hey, listen, we had a customer success organization. Okay, how do we make sure you're great at that? Sales organization, how do you make sure you're great at that? We had a product development organization. How do you make sure you're great at that? Fast forward now, where we are several orders of scale bigger. The focus really is on like, how do we integrate these functions so it's less about playing a tune and a song and more about this orchestral, kind of approach to making
Mhm.
sure that all the pieces fit together so that the value chain is just the value that it spins off is just so much greater.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's not too abstract, but it
No.
is that shift from like functional expertise in building to like, okay, how do we get all the functions working together so that you land it just perfectly and better than anybody else for our customers?
Yeah, really well said. And that speaks to, the evolution that you've seen at Omada Health, but also the evolution of, a commercial leader going, leading an organization through a fairly significant growth spurt. One of the things that you said that really stuck out is that whether it's early stage and you're one of 40 or 50 employees, or you're really getting ready to take off and you're 300 employees, you as a leader, there are certain aspects of the business where you remain in the front lines, you remain connected. And I think that's one of the most exciting components of being a senior leader within a small or emerging organization, is that you get that influence, you get that responsibility day to day. We call that practitionership, your ability to treat your work like an art form or a craft. And I always love asking leaders like yourself, could you ever go back to that massive tens of thousands of employee global organization, and if so, like, what would you bring from the experience that you had at Omada, or that you have at Omada?
I think that I certainly could. Now, whether I will or not is remains to be seen. I'm having too much fun with what we're doing right now. But I think the essence of the question is profound, and I think it goes both ways. If I were to join my prior employer, I think that what I would bring back is this uh, ability to do scrappy to scale, 0 to 1, in a very very rapid but like controlled way,
Hmm.
such that the biggest thing that big organizations fear is risk or something happening or breaking in on monolithic scale to where it becomes a huge problem, and so it prevents large companies from being very very scrappy on something, because they can think of the million things that could go wrong. And I would definitely bring that back. And I think a lot of large organizations try to do that, but they fail because of what I just talked about.
Right.
And really, the way to do this is the way that Silicon Valley does it and thinks about 0 to 1 or 0 to 100 or scrappy to scale. Is this ability to like do that and do it in a controlled, small way, and fail in a way that doesn't create significant iterative risk to the organization. We're going through something right now where it's very, very much like that. And there's this incredible book. There's incredible two books that kind of go together. One is called Zone to Win, and the other one's called Blitzscaling. And
Mm.
it really talks about these principles of how do you incubate something, and then how do you actually then begin to really pursue hyper growth within a mature large organization. And of course, you got to start out with secularized teams. You have to have dedicated resources, but it takes a pedigree of a different person to do scrappy in a large organization versus a person who's is very good at running a large organization but can't do scrappy. These are two different people,
Yeah.
and you've got to have both individuals within the organization. And I think that that's what I would take to a large organization. And I think it can be done. And so I highly recommend those two books if people really want to figure that out.
Great recommendations. And, I always say that one of the reasons that, I went out on my own and eventually started Thoughtium was because I had come from a large organization pedigree, and there were just a handful of things that I wanted to do within these large organizations that I either didn't have the time for, or the organization didn't have the appetite for. And I think that's what's so exciting about working for startups. It is really interesting to think about then those practices that we would bring to large organizations, because I do think they are transferable. So I appreciate some of those insights. Wei-Li, I know that part of the way that you lead with inspiration is bringing a bit of your own kind of personal story to the table. You're an inspiring person, both within the walls of the organizations that you work for and outside. And so, for those folks who maybe don't know you or haven't seen previous episodes with you on it, I'd love for you to just share what's one or two personal milestones in your life that have most impacted the way that you lead today.
I think there are so many, but if I were to pick, I guess two, they would be the following. The first one is very personal. You know my story, but for those that don't, in the sense that a few years ago, I was diagnosed with a fairly large brain tumor, almost the size of my fist. And so, believe it or not, you and I both don't have hair. I actually have hair.
For different reasons.
It's just I've got this massive scar on top of my head, and my hair would look really, really strange if I grew it out. Short of the long is that through that entire thing, of course, I was in the healthcare system, came from the healthcare system, was crazy in terms of how it all happened. I'm fine today, but had open brain surgery, all this kind of stuff. And what I learned in that event were a lot of things, but there's one thing that sticks to me, which is this: tomorrow is never a guarantee. So whatever you can do today, you should do today. And your day should be as full. Your expectations of what happens today should be big, because the enemy of our progress is that, hey, we can tackle that tomorrow. And so this whole tomorrow is never a guarantee just permeates through my entire life, both personally and professionally. It's how I consciously and unconsciously lead. It's like, hey, can we grow 20%? Yes. Why not push for 40 and 50? Because the opportunity may not be here tomorrow. So let's do it today.
Yeah.
The second one is, it happened at work. And I think this was, almost 10 years ago. I was leading a new team, an exciting division within a larger company, and was building it from the ground up. And suffice it to say, we made a mistake that got us into some regulatory issues around some advertising. And what happened is that in an FDA regulated environment, which is in pharmaceuticals, you can't just say whatever you want to say. It has to be aligned to regulatory standards. The bottom line is that there was something in our marketing materials that I was concerned about. Because I was concerned about it, I went to our regulatory colleagues and said, hey, could you look at this? And they said, oh, it's fine, Wei-Li. A couple months later, same thing. I was still concerned about it. So I asked them to look at it again. And they were like, Wei-Li, don't worry about it. It's fine. Sure enough, we put it out there in the marketplace. FDA cracked down on us within a week. My biggest learning was that, gosh, certainly you should rely on the people around you, the experts that you surrounded yourself with. But man, it should never supersede your intuition or your gut. You are in that position for a reason. And if your gut and intuition is screaming at you, there's something there. And so in fast growing markets where things are just not well defined, there's no better friend than your intuition. And you've got to pull on it. It doesn't mean you just act on it willy-nilly, but boy, you should pull on that string. You should pursue it until that intuitive alarm or blaring light begins to subside.
Yeah. Yeah. Two just wonderful examples of both how your story has impacted you, and also a little bit of the the art of your leadership. Today's episode is all about the art and science of leading commercial organizations. Wei-Li, I want to double click into this intuition piece because that sparked a little bit of inspiration. For me as a leader, I'm constantly asking myself, are you following your intuition or are you pushing against it? And I'm curious, those times that you find yourself pushing against it, like what is it sometimes that prevents us from following our intuition as a leader within an organization? And maybe we just name some of the obvious, right? Like some would say, shareholder expectations or, employee expectations. But like, as you think about that, what do you sometimes struggle with when it comes to following your intuition?
This one's easy because I have reflected on this so much. And as weird as it's going to sound, it's the following for me: humility. It's like I always leave the option out there or the specter of the possibility that I could be wrong.
I know this all too well.
And so I'm like, gosh, my intuition is saying this, but maybe I'm wrong. Right. And then I listen to people and whatever. And then I'm like, gosh, I really trust her, or he's really good and he or she's saying this to me. Gosh, it's kind of their area. Maybe I should just trust. And, Wei-Li, you're not always right. And so it's a double-edged sword, this thing called intuition and humility for me. Because you don't want to be crazy in the sense that you only listen to your intuition and don't listen to others. But at the same time, if you always listen to others, maybe you're always playing it safe. And so it's this tug and pull tension. I will say that where I have landed is the following, is that I can't remember a time where my intuition was wrong. And so it's not to say I follow it every time, but I pull the string on it every time, which means that if I feel something, I don't let it just hang out there. I pursue it. And that process of pursuit leads to something rational and objective as opposed to just from the gut. And so when I get that feeling, I know I need to pull. It doesn't mean I need to act. It means I need to discover and I need to pursue it. And invariably, 100% of the time, it leads to something productive.
That is so good. It's such great advice. Like the idea of pursuing those intuitive strings versus immediately acting. Because I think sometimes, we've been given this advice for ages as a leader, follow your intuition. But I think oftentimes that, we almost visualize like walking into a boardroom, blowing it up because you've got this gut feeling, right? But I think what you're describing here is like, there are times when you maybe just need to, as you said, pursue your intuition, and that might give you the pause that you need in order to potentially explore a more rational or options that you've never seen before. And I just think that's wonderful advice.
You're 1000% right. It's the process from moving from this fuzzy, ambiguous feeling to something that's very precise.
Yeah.
And it may not be exactly what you thought it was, a day or so ago, but boy, has it become super sharp. And the benefit of it is then people then through that process with you will follow you and they'll know why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the last thing we want as leaders is to over leverage gravitas and charisma with intuition. And then people follow you blindly, but they're not quite sure where you're going. But because you're compelling and because you have woo, they just trust you and they follow you.
Totally. Yeah. Yep. I love that. Or the opposite of that is where I find myself sometimes, because, the number one blocker to my intuition is also that kind of humility piece. And if you allow that to go to an extreme, you find yourself as a leader almost apologizing or prefacing everything that you say with, hey, this could be wrong. Or, I want to get consensus for the group, but, and I know there's time for that, but I want to go back to this idea of pursuing your intuition. I also think allows you then to go in with clarity when you do have a real perspective that has been shaped from a little bit of that pause and that pursuit, as opposed to the extremes, like you said, going in and blowing up the boardroom or being apologetic in advance about every decision that you're about to make. So Gosh, that's, I mean, that I could spend another hour on that. And Wei-Li, you should probably write a book like Pursuing Your Intuition, because we hear follow your intuition, but to pursue your intuition is a whole different art form. So I so appreciate you bringing that forward. We talked a little bit about the art of commercial leadership through Wei-Li's experience, and I just love this topic of intuition. The other side of this is the science, and I'm curious, Wei-Li, and you don't have to be all inclusive with this, but what is becoming or has always been scientific about leading a commercial organization? Like, what are the one or two things that you find yourself saying, I've got to be scientific about this, that maybe feelings aren't shouldn't be in the driver's seat here, or even intuition for that matter?
Yeah, I think I would sum it up by saying data driven. And I know a lot of other leaders talk about being data driven in their decision making or how they look at the business, so on and so forth. Super important. But when leading a commercial organization, there's this balance. You can call it a balance, you can call it attention, whatever, between listening to customers, going to visit a customer, listening to your front line, and then seeing what the data tells you. And you're always looking for this juncture or this match between what the data is telling you and what customers are telling you. And invariably, when I have found things go awry commercially, is that when you're over indexing on one side of the pole or the other. For instance, hey guys, why is our pipe a little bit slow? Oh, well, it's because of this, that, of this, and this could be validated by talking to this account executive and that account executive. And it almost reaches this mythological level where people believe it, because salespeople are so good at repeating a message to the point where you repeat it enough and it feels like fact. So I'm not saying that we as salespeople or commercial people are wrong when we talk to customers. It's just that we have also got to balance it with the data. I've also seen circumstances where we're saying, hey, listen, I'm not going to listen to my customers. I'm just going to look at the data. And that also leads you in the wrong direction, because data is by nature always lagging a customer dialogue. The customer dialogue is your leading indicator. Your data is your lagging indicator. I know data hounds out there will argue with me. Well, Wei-Li, there's leading data indicators and lagging data. Yes, I get all that. But at the end of the day, if you want to spot a true organic trend, it is in front of a customer.
Yeah.
If you want to determine if you want to scale and whether it's true and how big the truth is, you've got to look at the data.
That's so interesting. And I think the punchline there is just the right balance. Again, you think about the best commercial leaders out there, and they are a true balance between the art and the science, right? I've known a lot of, really successful commercial leaders out there that really rest on their ability to kind of organize and inspire folks. But when it comes to making data-driven decisions, they either rely on others, or maybe it's just not a part of their vocab. And I would consider you one that not only handles but respects both the art and science of commercial leadership, which has made you as effective as you have been over the years, Wei-Li. So again, thank you for your perspective. Do you have time for a quick lightning round before we close it out?
Sure. Always.
Okay. First question, and you had talked about a couple of books that you were reading earlier in the episode, which we will link in the show notes, and I'm definitely going to order myself. Outside of what you're reading, I know that you are always pursuing something physically. And I know that was it this past year, you and your leadership team did a fairly significant hike. What's one of the things that you're focused on in terms of like your physical endeavors? Because I know you're always focused on something.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things right now. You're so right. Yeah, we did this Everest 29029 thing. It's 29,000 miles or 29 miles over 29,000 feet of elevation and ascent. It was a 36-hour kind of endurance, and that was great. There are two things right now. One is there's this incredibly insightful book by Peter Attia called Outlive. And it is if you're looking at health span, longevity, it's a great way to think about, okay, how do you make investments today for a healthy and active life later? And there's some cutting edge stuff in there from a physiologic standpoint that I'm following and would suggest people just get curious and read it too as well. What's related to that is what's super cool is that a few of us here at Omada have signed up for a kind of an ultra next year. We're going to do 3 marathons in 3 days in July.
Wow.
And we're going to do it at like 8,000, I think maybe 9,000 feet of elevation in the middle of the summer. It's going to be epic. It's going to be epically hard, I think. But doing hard things is kind of what we're about.
I love that, and doing hard things as a team, I think, can bring so much more forward than just the standard kind of team building activities. Wei-Li, what is something, maybe it's a pattern or a behavior that you've noticed about your leadership style that has been the hardest to shake or change or shift? Like something you're working on today that you feel like you've been continuing to work on over the course of the last 10 years, something that you just haven't been able to shake just yet.
Oh man, we just finished, my HR business partner just finished doing a 360 on me with my direct reports. So the thing's timely. To my disappointment, there are 2 things that always come up. The first one is I'm not great at thanking people, big and small. And it's not because I don't have immense gratitude. It's a lot of it's my upbringing, who I am, my culture, my ethnicity, all those things. And also my hardwiring is like, I'm off to the next thing even before you finish the first thing. And so celebration just seems like outdated. But I need to get better at that. The second one is that this has been a lifelong thing, and I don't know how to take care of it, is that people don't know what I'm thinking. And I think that when I'm in a meeting, people are like, what's he thinking? I know he's thinking something. And I think for a small group of people, it drives them bonkers. I don't like that because I don't want people to be all that. But sometimes I can't just help the way I show up. I don't know if it's my face or whatever, but I don't know. If any viewer has any advice for me and gets that same feedback, send it on over to me. I would love to get that.
I'm the last person to give advice on walking into a room and immediately shifting the energy, because I'm sure my team would attest to that for sure. But I also just mentioned, like, what you just displayed there is maybe a level of self-awareness that we typically don't see. That's what's one thing you need to improve about yourself is in the pantheon of like interview questions that everybody kind of gives the canned response to. And those 2 pieces that you just shared, without kind of the buffering them with positivity on both sides, I think is, again, just a level of self-awareness that's pretty unique. Last question for you, Wei-Li. I want you to think about one thing that you really admire about yourself. And I want you to finish this sentence. If the world were a lot more like Wei-Li, it would be blank.
I have no idea, Anthony.
Maybe self-aware.
Maybe. I don't know. Man, that's an uncomfortable question. I don't know mentally if I have the ability to even go there.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you've got a lot of people around you that are reminding you, Wei-Li, that the way that you lead is not only effective, but it's unique. Again, I started the episode with kind of my measurement of what great looks like in organizations. The ability to play at all altitudes. That is, in my opinion, one of your kind of superpowers. The ability to respect and enjoy the practitionership of it, but then also know when to pursue your intuition and lead with your experience and everything that you know. And that's something that I absolutely admire about you, your ability to navigate every altitude of the organization. And the way that you bring your personal story into that and lead with humility is quite unique as well too. So I hope you don't mind me breathing a little bit of that positivity into who you are as a person and a leader. So thank you.
That's very kind. Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah. Awesome. Wei-Li, thank you so much for joining. Best of luck as you round out the year and all of your future endeavors, both personally and professionally. We appreciate you joining.
And to you too as well. And thanks for having me.
Of course. We'll see you soon.
All right, man. Cheers.
All right. We want to thank Wei-Li for joining this episode 209 of the Thoughtium Navigating Now Virtual Roundtable Series. Gosh, I love catching up with leaders that are at the forefront of a lot of change, both in marketplaces and organizations. In Wei-Li's case, as his organization has grown, so has his leadership. So we just love tapping into that expertise. We want to thank everybody who's joined, particularly those on LinkedIn. Our LinkedIn following has grown exponentially over the course of the last year. And that's you all engaging with our content, whether that's in the live stream or after the show has aired at thoughttium.com/live. We see you all. We thank you for being a part of our community, and we encourage you to tune in week over week. We will be here every Thursday at 3 p.m. You can catch this episode and all future